All right, let me set the scene for you. Picture this: Los Angeles, California, the city of dreams, where people from all over the world come chasing fame, fortune, and a better life. It's a place where movie stars and models walk the streets, where success stories are written every day, but also where darkness lurks beneath the glitz and glamour. And in the middle of it all, there was Jasmine Fiore, a beautiful, ambitious, and talented woman who was on her way to making something of herself. Now, Jasmine wasn't just some pretty face in a magazine. She was driven, smart, and incredibly hardworking. Born on February 18th, 1981, in Bonnie Doon, California, she grew up in a small, tight-knit community. But even as a little girl, she had big dreams. She wasn't content with just staying in one place. She wanted to make a name for herself, and she knew that to do that, she had to be where the action was. From a young age, she had a natural confidence about her. She wasn't just beautiful, she had charisma, a personality that drew people in. And when she got older, she decided to use that charm to her advantage. She started modeling, taking whatever gigs she could find, from swimsuit photo shoots to promotional work. And let me tell you, she stood out. She had this classic old Hollywood kind of beauty, like Marilyn Monroe, but with a modern edge. She was the kind of woman who commanded attention without even trying. But here's the thing: Jasmine wasn't just looking to be famous. She had bigger goals. She wasn't the type to sit around waiting for an opportunity to fall into her lap. She went out and made things happen. She was deeply interested in business, and she didn't just rely on modeling to pay her bills. She got into real estate, working as an agent, learning how to invest in properties, and thinking ahead to her future. She was always planning her next move, and one of her biggest dreams was to open her own gym. She wasn't just thinking about money, she wanted to create something meaningful, something she could call her own. Jasmine also had a reputation for being a social butterfly. She loved being around people, going to high-profile events, making connections. She was always at the hottest parties, rubbing elbows with celebrities, athletes, and entrepreneurs. She had this effortless way of making friends, and people naturally gravitated toward her. And trust me, in a place like Los Angeles, that's a rare gift, because let's be real, LA is full of people who just want to use you to get ahead. But despite all the glamour and the attention, Jasmine stayed grounded. She didn't let the Hollywood lifestyle completely consume her. She had a tight circle of friends who genuinely cared about her, and she was incredibly close with her mother, Lisa. Her mom was her rock, the person she could always count on when things got tough. And in the fast-paced, cutthroat world of modeling and entertainment, having that kind of support was everything. Now, with her beauty, ambition, and social status, Jasmine naturally attracted a lot of attention from men. And let me tell you, she had no shortage of admirers. She had been in relationships with wealthy businessmen, athletes, and socialites. She had experienced the highs and lows of dating in LA, and she knew how to handle herself. She was fiercely independent and never let anyone control her. She was the kind of woman who could hold her own in any situation. But as we all know, sometimes even the strongest people can get caught up in something toxic. Sometimes love can blind you to the red flags waving right in front of your face. And for Jasmine, that's exactly what happened when she met Ryan Jenkins, a man who at first glance seemed like he had it all, but who turned out to be her worst nightmare. At the time, Jasmine was living the kind of life that many people dreamed of. She had beauty, ambition, and the confidence to chase after what she wanted. She wasn't afraid to take risks, to put herself out there, to make a name for herself in a city where so many people fade into the background. But in the end, it wasn't Los Angeles that betrayed her, it was the man she thought she could trust. Her story is tragic, not just because of how it ended, but because of what could have been. Jasmine Fiore was more than just a model, more than just a pretty face in Hollywood. She was a woman with dreams, with ambition, with the potential to build an incredible life for herself. She had the drive to be successful on her own terms. And the most heartbreaking part of all of this, she never got the chance to see just how far she could go. All right, let's talk about Ryan Jenkins, the man at the center of this tragic and twisted story. Now, when people first hear his name, the first thing that usually comes up is reality TV. And yeah, he was on a show, Megan Wants a Millionaire, but let me tell you, this guy was far from the smooth, rich, successful millionaire he made himself out to be. In reality, Ryan Jenkins was a walking red flag, a guy who hid behind a flashy image but had serious issues beneath the surface. So who was he? Ryan was born in Canada in 1977, and right off the bat, he came from a privileged background. His dad was a wealthy real estate developer, which meant Ryan never really struggled for anything in life. He grew up in a world of money, status, and entitlement, and let's be real, people like that, they don't always grow up to be the most humble, well-adjusted individuals. Ryan was the kind of guy who always wanted more money, more success, more attention. He wasn't content with just being a successful businessman. He wanted to be famous. Now, don't get me wrong, he was ambitious. He followed in his father's footsteps and got into real estate development, just like Daddy Jenkins. And to be fair, he did well for himself. He had money, nice cars, the expensive suits. He played the part of the successful businessman perfectly. But there was something else. He craved the spotlight. He wanted people to know his name, to see his face on TV, to be admired. So when the opportunity came to be on a reality show, he jumped at it. And that's how he ended up on Megan Wants a Millionaire. Now let me break this show down for you. If you haven't seen it, don't worry, you didn't miss much. It was basically The Bachelor, but make it about money. The premise was simple. A bunch of rich guys competed for the love of Megan Hauserman, a former contestant from Rock of Love with Bret Michaels. The whole idea was that Megan wanted to find a millionaire to marry, so the show lined up a bunch of supposedly wealthy men to try and win her over. And guess who was one of those men? Ryan Jenkins. Now here's the thing about reality TV. It's all about the characters. They pick contestants who are going to stir up drama, people who are going to make things interesting. And Ryan? He was perfect for TV. He was cocky, charming, confident, and most importantly, rich. Or at least, that's how he made himself look. But what the show didn't know, what they didn't bother to check, was that Ryan had a history of being aggressive and abusive toward women. Yeah, this guy had a past. And if producers had done a little digging, they probably wouldn't have let him anywhere near a reality TV set. See, Ryan wasn't just some smooth-talking, confident guy. He had serious issues with control and anger. His ex-girlfriends had warned people about him. He was known to be jealous, possessive, and violent. But because he came from money and knew how to put on a show, he slid under the radar and ended up on TV, smiling, acting like a gentleman, fooling everyone. And let me tell you, he thought he was hot stuff. On the show, he acted like he was God's gift to women. He bragged about his money, about how successful he was. He was the type of guy who walked into a room and expected everyone to be impressed. And for a while it worked. Megan was interested in him. He lasted a few episodes, and he really thought he was going to win. But here's the twist: Megan wasn't buying it. Now, Megan might have been looking for a rich guy, but she wasn't stupid. She picked up on Ryan's controlling and intense personality, and eventually she eliminated him from the show. And let me tell you, Ryan did not take it well. He was furious. He felt humiliated. This was supposed to be his big break, his chance to be a reality TV star, to make a name for himself, to be on magazine covers. Instead, he got kicked off and sent home. And that rejection, it did something to him. Now, you'd think after getting eliminated, he'd just move on, right? Maybe go back to real estate, try to get on another show, do something productive. Nope. Instead, he went to Vegas. And that's where he met Jasmine Fiore. Now, this is where things take a turn. Because Ryan, fresh off his reality TV failure, was desperate to prove himself. He wanted to feel like he was still a big deal, still important. And when he met Jasmine, this stunning, confident, successful woman, he saw her as a prize. He wanted to win her the way he thought he should have won Megan. And here's the crazy part: they met at a casino, partied for 2 days, and got married in Vegas. Yeah, 2 days. It was like he was trying to rewrite his own story, to prove that he was still the rich, successful, desirable guy he wanted people to think he was. But in reality, he was just a ticking time bomb. Their relationship was a disaster from the start. Ryan was obsessive, controlling, and possessive. He accused Jasmine of cheating, monitored her every move, and constantly tried to prove that he was the one in control. But Jasmine, she wasn't the type to be controlled. She was strong, independent, and not afraid to stand up for herself. And that drove Ryan insane. The relationship was filled with explosive fights, jealousy, and threats. And it was only a matter of time before it reached a breaking point. And unfortunately, when it did, Jasmine paid the price. See, Ryan wasn't just a reality TV star. He was a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. And when he did, it led to one of the most shocking and disturbing crimes in reality TV history. All right, let's talk about Ryan Jenkins and Jasmine Fiore's relationship, because this was not some fairy tale romance. It was the kind of relationship where, from the outside, people might have thought they were a glamorous, exciting couple, good-looking, wealthy, living the high life. But behind closed doors, it was a complete disaster. This was toxic, messy, and dangerous from the very beginning. Let's start with how insanely fast this whole thing happened. Ryan and Jasmine met in March 2009 in Las Vegas at a casino party. And when I say met, I mean they barely knew each other before things escalated. It wasn't like they spent months getting to know one another, figuring out if they were compatible. No, this was instant, impulsive, and reckless. They met, partied for a couple of days, and then boom, they got married. Now let's just stop for a second and really think about that. 2 days, 48 hours. That's how long it took for them to make a lifelong commitment. Who does that? I mean, sure, people have crazy Vegas weddings all the time, but this wasn't some fun, drunken mistake that they laughed about later. Ryan actually thought he won something. It was like he was trying to prove something to the world, that he could get the girl, that he could still come out on top after getting rejected on Megan Wants a Millionaire. And Jasmine, maybe she was caught up in the excitement. Maybe she liked the idea of being with someone who was successful. Maybe she thought it would be fun. But whatever the reason was, this was doomed from the start. Because here's the thing about relationships that move too fast: they burn out just as quickly. And within days of getting married, the problems started. Ryan had always been controlling and obsessive, but now that Jasmine was his wife, it got even worse. He wanted to control every aspect of her life: who she talked to, where she went, what she wore. He hated that she had male friends. He constantly accused her of cheating, even though he had no real proof. And the more she pushed back, the worse he got. And Jasmine, she was not the kind of woman to be controlled. She was strong-willed, independent, and confident. She had built her own career, made her own money, and lived life on her own terms. She wasn't about to let some guy she barely knew tell her what she could and couldn't do. So what did she do? She fought back. She didn't just take Ryan's accusations and jealousy, she called him out on it. And when he got too intense, she would leave. Now, if this were a normal couple, they might have realized early on that they weren't a good match and just gone their separate ways. But Ryan, he couldn't handle rejection. He was the kind of guy who needed constant validation. He wanted to feel like he was in control, and when Jasmine didn't let him have that, he became obsessed with trying to win her back, punish her, and keep her under his thumb. And let's talk about the abuse, because this wasn't just a toxic relationship where they argued all the time. It got violent. There were multiple incidents where Ryan got physically aggressive with Jasmine. In fact, just a few months after their wedding, Jasmine had him arrested for domestic violence. Now, think about that. She had known him for less than 5 months, and he had already hurt her badly enough that she had to involve the police. That's how fast things spiraled. And this was a pattern with Ryan. He wasn't just abusive toward Jasmine, he had a history of violence toward women. There were other exes who had spoken out about how he was controlling, jealous, and violent. But he always managed to charm his way out of trouble. He was the kind of guy who could be charming 1 minute and terrifying the next, which is exactly why Jasmine kept going back and forth with him. They would break up, then make up. He would beg her to take him back, promise to change, shower her with gifts, tell her that they were meant to be together. And for a while she would give in. But it was never different. The same jealousy, paranoia, and aggression would always come back. And after a few months, she finally had enough. By the summer of 2009, Jasmine wanted out for good. She told her friend she was done with Ryan, that she was planning to get their marriage annulled. She wanted a fresh start, and Ryan knew it. And let me tell you, he did not take it well. His entire relationship with Jasmine had been about control, and now he was losing it. He was desperate. He tried to hold on to win her back, but Jasmine was pulling away. She started talking to other men, going out more, making it clear that she wasn't afraid of him anymore. And that drove Ryan insane. It all came to a boiling point in August 2009, when the two of them went on a trip to San Diego together. Now, why did Jasmine even agree to go? Maybe she wanted closure. Maybe Ryan convinced her that they could talk things out. Maybe she didn't want to make him angrier by refusing. But whatever the reason was, this trip would be the last time anyone saw Jasmine alive. Because Ryan, he wasn't going to let her go that easily. All right, let's take a step back and talk about August 14, 2009, the night everything came crashing down. This wasn't just another argument between Jasmine Fiore and Ryan Jenkins. This was the breaking point, the moment when everything spiraled completely out of control. By this point, their relationship was already a disaster. Jasmine was done. She wanted nothing to do with Ryan anymore, and she was making that crystal clear. She had been seeing other people. She was pushing for an annulment, and she was ready to move on. And Ryan? He was obsessed with keeping her. He had lost control and he couldn't stand it. That night they were in San Diego, staying at the L'Auberge del Mar Hotel, a luxury resort, the kind of place where people go for romance, relaxation, and escape. But inside their room, it was a war zone. Earlier that evening, Jasmine and Ryan had gone out to a poker tournament at the Hilton. Sounds innocent enough, right? Just a fun night out, maybe a distraction from all the tension between them. But if you know anything about Ryan, you know that his jealousy was always simmering beneath the surface. And that night, something set him off. Jasmine was flirting with other men. Maybe she was doing it to make a point. Maybe she was just being friendly. Maybe she just didn't care anymore what Ryan thought. But for a guy like Ryan, a guy who was obsessive, possessive, and insecure, that was his worst nightmare. He watched her, his mind racing, paranoia creeping in. He had always accused her of cheating, even when she wasn't. But tonight, in his head, she was proving him right. And that was unacceptable. Things only got worse when Jasmine left the poker tournament without him. Imagine that. She just got up and left. didn't wait for him, didn't care how he felt about it. She took off, and Ryan lost it. When he finally got back to their hotel room, he was seething. He was ready for a fight. And what happened behind those doors? It was brutal. We don't know exactly what was said, but we do know it was explosive. They fought about everything. The flirting, the jealousy, the accusations, the past abuse. Jasmine had had enough. She was done with his controlling, possessive behavior, and she wasn't going to let him intimidate her anymore. And Ryan? He couldn't handle it. Here's something you have to understand about a guy like Ryan Jenkins. He was all about control. He wanted Jasmine to fear him, to need him, to depend on him. And when she stood up to him, when she made it clear that she was leaving him for good, he snapped. At some point during the night, things turned violent. Maybe she tried to leave. Maybe she told him to pack his things and get out. Maybe she said something that shattered his fragile ego. Whatever it was, Ryan lost every ounce of control he had left. He attacked her. This wasn't just a slap or a shove. This was rage, pure and uncontrollable. He wasn't just trying to hurt her. He wanted to destroy her. Now, here's the part that's truly disturbing. Ryan didn't just kill Jasmine. He mutilated her body in the most gruesome way possible. He pulled out her teeth, cut off her fingers, making it nearly impossible for authorities to identify her. This wasn't just about silencing her. This was about erasing her completely. Think about that for a second. Think about the level of rage, the level of obsession it takes to do something like that. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a cold, calculated attempt to make sure no one ever found out what happened. And the most chilling part? After it was done, Ryan calmly packed up his things and left. He didn't cry. He didn't panic. He didn't even try to cover up the crime in some elaborate way. He just put her body in a suitcase, took it down to his car, and drove off. Like he had just taken out the trash. All right, let's talk about what happened 2 days after that brutal night in the hotel room. Because this is where everything truly unraveled. So, Ryan Jenkins had just committed one of the most horrific crimes imaginable. He had beaten and strangled Jasmine Fiore to death in their hotel room. But what made it even worse, what made it completely inhuman, was what he did after. He didn't just leave her body there. No, that would have been too simple, too sloppy. Instead, he did something so disturbing, so cold-blooded, that it still shocks people to this day. He mutilated her body. Now, let's really stop and think about that for a second, because this isn't just an angry guy lashing out in the heat of the moment. This is something much darker. Ryan cut off Jasmine's fingers and pulled out her teeth. And why would he do that? To make it harder, almost impossible, for police to identify her. This was not some random crime of passion. This was deliberate, calculated, and terrifyingly methodical. He wanted to erase her, to make sure no one could recognize her if she was found. He knew exactly what he was doing. And after all of that, he stuffed her body into a suitcase. Think about that for a second. He had just murdered this woman, the woman he once called his wife, the woman he had claimed to love, and instead of showing even an ounce of remorse, he shoved her lifeless body into a suitcase like she was nothing, like she was just some object he could throw away. And then he drove off. Now, here's where things get even more chilling, because Ryan didn't just panic and run right away. No, this guy was smooth, calculating. He knew that if he acted normal, he might be able to get away with it. So, the next morning, he checked out of the hotel like nothing had happened. Seriously, he walked out of that luxury resort, calm, collected, probably even polite to the staff on the way out. And where did he go? He drove to Los Angeles, taking Jasmine's body with him in the trunk of his car. Now, we don't know exactly what his plan was at this point. Maybe he thought he could find a way to dispose of the body without getting caught. Maybe he thought he could run. Maybe he was still figuring it out. But what we do know is that he ended up in Buena Park, California. And this is where the nightmare finally came to light. 2 days after the murder, on the morning of August 15th, 2009, a homeless man was digging through a dumpster in an alley behind an apartment complex. It was just another ordinary day for him, looking for anything useful. But then, he found the suitcase. It was a small, blood-stained suitcase, just sitting there in the trash, dumped like someone wanted it to disappear. Something about it didn't seem right, and when he opened it, inside was Jasmine Fiore's body. Crammed, broken, unrecognizable. The police were called immediately, and let me tell you, when they arrived, they were horrified. This wasn't just a murder, this was a statement. Someone had gone to extreme lengths to make sure this body was difficult, if not impossible, to identify. Her fingers were missing, her teeth were gone, there were bruises all over her body, signs of struggle, signs that she had fought for her life. But even though Ryan had done everything he could to erase her identity, he made one mistake. There was one thing he couldn't remove: her breast implants. Now, here's something most people don't realize. Modern breast implants come with serial numbers, and when the coroner examined Jasmine's body, they were able to track down her medical records and confirm who she was. That was it. They had her name, and once they had her name, they had Ryan Jenkins. And just like that, Ryan's world fell apart. All right, let's really talk about what Ryan Jenkins did after murdering Jasmine Fiore. Because this wasn't just some crime of passion where someone loses control and then panics. No, what Ryan did after killing Jasmine was something much darker, much colder. It was calculated, deliberate, and absolutely horrifying. So, at some point, after the fight had turned violent, after he had strangled her to death, Ryan was left alone in that hotel room with Jasmine's lifeless body. And instead of breaking down, instead of calling for help, instead of showing even a single ounce of remorse, he started thinking about how to get away with it. He knew he had a problem. He knew if police found her body, they would know it was her. And if they knew it was her, he would be their first suspect. Because think about it, who else would they look at? A young woman murdered in a hotel, last seen with her husband? It was obvious. So in his twisted, delusional mind, he convinced himself that if he could just erase Jasmine's identity, maybe he could buy himself some time. Maybe, just maybe, he could actually get away with it. And this is where things get truly disturbed, because Ryan didn't just dump the body and run. He spent time with it. He made a plan. He knew that if Jasmine's body was found, they could identify her in one of 3 ways: facial recognition, fingerprints, dental records. So, what did he do? He tried to erase all of them. He started with her fingers. This wasn't just some panicked, sloppy attempt to cover his tracks. This was methodical. He took a knife and cut off her fingers and let that sink in for a second. Because that's not something that happens in an instant. That takes time, effort, and a complete detachment from reality. This was his wife. This was the woman he had once promised to love and protect, and now he was desecrating her body in the most horrific way possible. And why? Because he was trying to save himself. But he didn't stop there. He knew that even without fingerprints, police could still identify her using dental records. So what did he do? He went even further. He pulled out her teeth. Think about that for a second. Really think about what that means. He didn't just break her jaw or damage her mouth. He manually removed her teeth, one by one. And how do you even do that? Did he use pliers? Did he do it with his bare hands? Was he angry while he was doing it, or was he eerily calm? We'll never really know. But what we do know is that he made a conscious decision to do it. And this tells us everything we need to know about who Ryan Jenkins really was. Because this wasn't some random burst of rage. This was premeditated, evil, and completely heartless. At this point, he had dehumanized her. She wasn't his wife anymore. She wasn't even a person anymore. She was evidence, and in his mind, he just needed to make sure that evidence couldn't be traced back to him. And once he had done the unthinkable, he shoved her body into a suitcase like she was nothing and drove away, thinking that he had successfully erased her. But what Ryan didn't know, what he never even considered, was that there was still one piece of evidence left that he couldn't remove. Jasmine Fiore had breast implants, and those implants had serial numbers, and that was his biggest mistake. Alright, so at this point Ryan Jenkins had done the unthinkable. He had murdered Jasmine Fiore in cold blood, tried to erase her identity by removing her teeth and fingers, and then stuffed her into a suitcase like trash before dumping her in a dumpster behind an apartment complex in Buena Park, California. And now he was on the run. See, Ryan wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what was going to happen next. The second Jasmine's body was identified, the police would come looking for him. He was the obvious suspect. Her husband, the last person seen with her, the man who had a violent history with her. He had no chance of talking his way out of this, no way to explain away what happened. So, instead of facing the consequences, instead of turning himself in, instead of owning up to what he had done, he ran. At first, Ryan tried to act normal. He didn't immediately disappear, because he knew that would look suspicious. Instead, he actually reported Jasmine missing. That's right, he played the worried husband. He called her friends. He acted concerned. He told people that she had vanished after their trip to San Diego. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the police had already found Jasmine's body. And as soon as they did, as soon as they realized who she was, everything unraveled. Jasmine's death was ruled a homicide, and almost immediately the police started putting the pieces together. They traced her last known whereabouts, they checked who she was with, and all roads led back to one person, Ryan Jenkins. The second the police publicly named Ryan as a person of interest, he knew it was over, so he ran. Now, Ryan was a Canadian citizen. He had been living in the US on a work visa, but Canada was his home. It was the one place he thought he could escape to, the one place where he might have a chance at disappearing. But getting there, that was going to be tricky. See, at this point, Ryan's face was everywhere. The police were hunting for him. The media was covering the case, splashing his mugshot all over the news. Airports were on alert. Border checkpoints were watching for him, and there was nowhere to hide. But Ryan, he had a plan. Instead of trying to drive across the border, where he'd have to show ID and risk getting caught, he did something desperate. He found a boat. On August 19th, 2009, just days after Jasmine's body was found, Ryan chartered a speedboat from a marina in Washington state. The plan? Sail across the border, into Canada, and disappear. And here's the thing, he almost got away with it. He paid a man named Robert Ferry to take him across the water. Ferry later said that Ryan seemed calm, not like a guy who had just committed one of the most brutal murders imaginable, but like someone who was just going on a little trip. Ryan hid in the cabin of the boat, avoiding any attention, avoiding any chance of being recognized. The boat sped across the water, cutting through the waves, heading straight for Canada, and just like that, he was out of the US. When the boat docked in Point Roberts, British Columbia, Ryan stepped onto Canadian soil, thinking he was free, thinking he had escaped, thinking that maybe, just maybe, he could get away with it. But what Ryan didn't realize, what he never saw coming, was that his time was running out. Ryan Jenkins thought he had gotten away. After chartering a speedboat across the US-Canada border, he stepped onto Canadian soil, believing he had left everything behind. The murder, the investigation, the media storm that was erupting around Jasmine Fiore's horrific death. But what he didn't know, what he never anticipated, was that his time was running out. By this point, Ryan was one of the most wanted men in North America. His face was everywhere. News stations were blasting his mugshot across the screen. True crime forums were buzzing with theories, and social media was exploding with speculation about where he might be. The police were tracking his movements, his family was being questioned, and the net was tightening around him. And yet, in his delusional mind, he still thought he had a chance. See, after sneaking into Canada, Ryan didn't immediately go into deep hiding. Instead, he headed to the town of Hope, British Columbia. A quiet, out-of-the-way place surrounded by mountains and forests. A place where he thought he could lay low, out of sight, out of mind, until he figured out his next move. And then the rapid hecticity began. Instead of hiding in some remote cabin or disappearing into the wilderness, he checked into a cheap motel, the Thunderbird Motel, a rundown, no-questions-asked kind of place, the kind of motel where people go when they don't want to be found. And for a little while, it worked. He stayed under the radar, barely leaving his room, probably watching the news, waiting for the chaos to die down. Maybe he was planning his next move, maybe he was trying to figure out how to escape even further. But what he didn't realize was that the police were already closing in on him. See, by the time Ryan reached the motel, police had already tracked his movements. They knew he had made it to Canada. They knew he was somewhere nearby, and they had started piecing together his escape route. And then they got the tip that changed everything. The motel's manager, a man named Wayne Halcrow, had been watching the news. He had seen Ryan's face on TV, heard the reports about Jasmine's brutal murder, and something clicked. He had seen that face before, in his own motel. Ryan had checked in under a fake name, but it didn't fool anyone for long. The second Halcrow realized who was staying in one of his rooms, he called the police, and just like that, the hunt was over. On August 23, 2009, just over a week after Jasmine's body was discovered, Canadian authorities moved in. They descended on the Thunderbird Motel, ready to arrest Ryan Jenkins and bring him to justice. But when they finally entered his room, it was too late. When police finally tracked down Ryan Jenkins to that tiny, run-down Thunderbird Motel in Hope, British Columbia, they were expecting a dramatic arrest. After all, this was one of the most wanted men in North America, a man who had brutally murdered his wife, mutilated her body, and gone on the run. They were preparing for a chase, maybe even a violent standoff. But what they found when they entered his motel room? It was something entirely different, because by the time police burst into room 2 at the Thunderbird Motel, Ryan Jenkins was already dead. He had hanged himself. Now, let's break this down. Because this wasn't some last-minute spur-of-the-moment decision. No, this was calculated. This was planned. When Ryan checked into the motel, he had used a fake name, trying to stay hidden. He paid for 3 nights in cash, which tells us he was at least thinking about staying low for a little while. But something must have changed. Maybe it was the pressure of the manhunt, The fact that his face was all over the news, or maybe it finally hit him that there was no way out of this. Whatever it was, at some point Ryan must have realized it was over. Now, instead of waiting for the inevitable, the police knocking at his door, the handcuffs, the trial, the life sentence, the shame, he decided to take the coward's way out. And here's the disturbing part. This wasn't a desperate, chaotic suicide, no. It was methodical. It was planned. Sometime on August 23, 2009, Ryan tied a belt to the metal bar of the closet in his motel room. He stood there, alone, looking at himself in the mirror, knowing that this was the end of the line. And then, he stepped off. Now, let's really think about what that means, because this is a guy who murdered his wife in cold blood, who mutilated her body to cover his tracks, who fled across the country to escape justice, and now, when it was time to face what he had done, he couldn't handle it. He chose death over accountability. The motel manager, Wayne Halcrow, was the one who found him. After calling the police, Halcrow had gone to check on the room, probably expecting to see Ryan inside. Maybe watching TV, maybe trying to plan his next move. But when he opened the door, Ryan's lifeless body was hanging there, swinging slightly, his face pale, his neck bruised, his escape plan finally coming to a permanent, silent end. Police arrived shortly after, but there was nothing they could do. There would be no arrest, no trial, no justice for Jasmine. Ryan had cheated the system one last time, and just like that, the story ended. Not with a conviction, not with a courtroom sentence, but with a man who chose to take his own life, rather than face the consequences of his actions. And the worst part? He never had to answer for what he did. Now, this is where the case takes a wild turn, because Ryan Jenkins wasn't just some random guy. He was a reality TV star, someone who had been put in the spotlight, glorified on national television as one of the eligible, wealthy bachelors competing for love. But after his horrific crime came to light, everything changed. When the news broke that Ryan had murdered Jasmine Fiore, it wasn't just a criminal case. It became a full-blown scandal that rocked the reality TV industry. And at the center of it all, VH1 and the producers of Megan Wants a Millionaire. See, at the time, reality TV was booming. Shows like The Bachelor, Flavor of Love, and Rock of Love had captivated audiences, making instant celebrities out of total nobodies. And Megan Wants a Millionaire was supposed to be the next big hit. The premise? Former Rock of Love contestant Megan Hauserman was looking for a rich husband, and Ryan Jenkins was one of the contestants. The show had already started airing, and Ryan had been heavily featured as one of the top contenders for Megan's affection. He was charming, successful, and, on camera at least, seemed like the kind of guy any woman would want. But after Jasmine's murder, everything fell apart. Almost immediately, VH1 pulled the show off the air. They didn't just delay it or edit Ryan out, they cancelled it completely, scrubbing any trace of it from their network. Episodes that had already aired were yanked, promos were erased, and it was as if the show had never existed. Why? Because the scandal was massive. Think about it. How did this guy even get cast on the show? How did VH1 and the production company 51 Minds Entertainment allow a violent, dangerous man onto a dating show? People started asking questions, and what they found was deeply disturbing. It turned out that Ryan wasn't just some rich playboy. He had a history of domestic violence. Before coming on the show, he had been charged with assaulting a woman, and he was on probation for attacking a previous girlfriend. And here's the kicker. He never should have been cast in the first place. See, before contestants appear on reality TV, they're supposed to go through extensive background checks. The production company claimed they did one, but clearly something went wrong. Either they ignored the red flags or their vetting process completely failed, because Ryan was hiding in plain sight and they still let him in. This revelation was a PR nightmare. The idea that a reality show had accidentally given a platform to a future murderer? That shattered the public's trust in how these shows were made. It exposed how reckless casting decisions could be, how these shows weren't always about finding love, but about sensationalism, drama, and ratings at any cost. And VH1, they wanted nothing to do with it. After canceling Megan Wants a Millionaire, they also shut down another show Ryan had been on, I Love Money 3. This was a competition reality show where former contestants from VH1's dating shows competed for cash. Ryan had actually won. He had filmed the entire season, gone through all the challenges, and walked away with the grand prize. But now, that footage would never see the light of day. VH1 refused to air it. They didn't want their brand tied to a murderer, didn't want people associating their shows with a man who had killed his wife in one of the most horrific ways possible. But the damage had been done. This case forever changed reality TV. It forced networks to rethink how they cast contestants, to take background checks more seriously, and to acknowledge that the people they put on TV weren't just characters. They were real people with real pasts, and sometimes real darkness inside them. And in the end, the scandal didn't just take down one show, it exposed the dark side of reality TV itself.